introduction. How
Yes.
and very especially the comment on Donald Trump.
Sorry, again, I didn't hear that. No, your comment on Donald Trump.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. Yeah, I mean, I think he would have been able to sign an executive order to make this happen. Um, but I think that there's technical kind of legalities involved here. And just to be clear, that the judge didn't make a ruling; she made a recommendation, which is
Ah,
now going to go to another judge, who will either uphold it or not, or accept it or not. So this is not the end of the story as far as this is concerned. The bigger issue, of course, is that this, we're talking about billions of dollars that actually
mm,
belong to the Afghan people, not to the Taliban, but the Afghan people, people who at the moment are in dire humanitarian situation, suffering because of a lack of food. Talking about more than 50% of the population that is food deprived, for example, and this money, 7 billion of it sitting in the U.S. and 2 billion in other Western countries. That is the real tragedy that we should be talking about.
why is I'm just wondering about the cruelty and just the uh, that the international community is so totally unconcerned about this issue. Again, is it because it's Afghanistan? Is it because it's about Black people? Is it because they see us as being lesser beings and not as human as they are? That's the issue uh, and I guess we know the answer to that. We know the answer to that. But let's just hone in on the seizure of the central bank's assets. Um, the United States and other Western countries are suggesting that if they do release the funds, it's going to legitimize the Taliban government. And I'm wondering if the funds are in fact released, um, would that make a huge difference to the people of Afghanistan? The Taliban's governorship hasn't yet been tested as far as that is concerned, has it? In terms of are they going to make certain that they use the money for infrastructure, for creating jobs, for health, for education? It hasn't been tested as far as corruption is concerned in other Middle Eastern, I guess all around the world, governments are pretty corrupt and lots of the money goes into their own pockets.
Well, firstly, the question of legitimizing the Taliban. I mean, to be frank, the U.S. legitimized the Taliban when they negotiated with them for 2, 3 years in Doha. They
Mm,
negotiated with the Taliban for transfer of power from when the Americans ended the occupation, and the Taliban would, well, they ended the occupation. It wasn't kind of
mm.
a real transfer of power. So, to now say that they want to legitimize the Taliban, I think is kind of neither here nor there. Um, Certainly, their claim is that they don't want to legitimize the Taliban government, which in itself is, a fairly hypocritical statement. Hypocritical because, yes, I mean, I would agree that the Taliban is responsible for various kinds of human rights abuses. And, we can talk about previously, we can talk about in the past year as well, in terms of girls' education, all of those kinds of things. But the point is that the United States has some of its strongest allies that commit worse human rights violations than the Taliban has in the past year. Talk about Saudi Arabia, talk about Israel, others. So that also is not kind of legitimate reason for not even for not recognizing the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan. I think the one thing is that the American withdrawal from Afghanistan after its 20-year occupation, the withdrawal a year ago, was a complete kind of shame and embarrassment for the United States. And recognizing the Taliban government would be kind of putting a cherry on the top of that shame and embarrassment, because it was the Taliban that took over and that benefited from the completely disorganized and chaotic withdrawal. So that's the one thing. The other thing I think is related to this to the court recommendation that you spoke about, and that is that the 9/11 story, of course, is an emotional story in the United States, and the United States successive governments have spun it as it being the fault of the Taliban, and now it's a bit difficult to unspin that. Because the reality was, of course, that the Taliban was not responsible or not involved in the events of 9/11. It possibly was Al-Qaeda that was involved. They're not the same thing. And most of the people involved in the 9/11 events seem to have been Saudis. There's no action taken against Saudi Arabia by the United States. So the Taliban has been made out to be this bogeyman that was responsible for the greatest attack on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor, and now to legitimize that would be, problematic for any U.S. government. So I think all of these kind of factors put together, but at the end of the day, the money that has been frozen, $7 billion in the U.S., $2 billion elsewhere. The money that has been frozen does not belong to the Taliban. It belongs to the Afghan people. And it's not, what is required right now is not even funds for infrastructural development. It's funds for just to save people's lives right now. And that's how desperate the situation is. Secondly, that if they were really, concerned about whatever the legitimization of the Taliban or whatever the case might be, there are other ways of doing it. I mean, the UN has the UN World Food Program, for example, other structures. There are numerous NGOs that would be quite willing to play that role. At this stage in time, it seems that the Taliban would be willing to accept that the money does not go to them, as long as people's lives are being saved, as long as that kind of relief goes out to people who are starving to death, literally, all over the country. But that's not happening. So there are ways of doing it, bypassing the Taliban even, but even that is not happening. So, the question remains, what is the kind of intention? And as you said, rightly so, do they just not care? And I think, in that kind of world of politics, no, they don't. Calculations are made on political interests, not on human lives.
Absolutely. You suggesting that the Taliban are quite prepared to let other parties handle the funds that are rightly due to the Afghani people. Whom do you suppose these parties would be? Because prior to the Taliban coming into power, we do know that the sitting president at the time, the Afghani sitting president at the time, skipped the country, and it was alleged that he skipped the country with millions or billions of dollars, for that matter. So we do know that there are governments all around the world, very especially in the Middle Eastern countries, who are very, very corrupt. How are they going to then, utilize the monies, ascertain that it goes to the right people, the neediest of the needy, and that monies are not going into the pockets of corrupt officials?
Well, firstly, the successive governments in Kabul that have been put in place over the 20 years of U.S. occupation have probably been the most corrupt that Afghanistan has experienced. One thing that is not said in the same kind of level or intensity about corruption or about the Taliban is that they are corrupt. And you can make a whole range of other accusations against them that might be legitimate. But the one about corruption might not hold up as strongly, and certainly the corruption in the period when they governed previously and in the past year doesn't match up in any way to the corruption of previous presidents in the past 20 years or in the 20 years of U.S. occupation. So I don't think that the corruption factor is as big a factor as it was when the U.S. was occupying it and when they poured billions of dollars into these corrupt governments. But secondly, the point is that, as I said, if they were really interested about saving lives, there are ways of bypassing the Taliban. The UN has agencies that are working in Afghanistan. Money could go through the UN and proper mechanisms set up to ensure that they work properly. There are various relief and medical and other types of NGOs that are doing work in Afghanistan and that could continue doing work if they had funds coming to them. It is possible to do it without a great deal of difficulty if there's a political will to do it, and clearly there isn't.
Absolutely. So it's just really a wait and see game, and in the meanwhile, these people,
For the Afghan people, it's wait and die actually. Not wait and see.
Absolutely. For us as foreigners, people looking from the outside in, it's a wait and see. And you rightly say it's a wait and die situation in Afghanistan. So let's see how this plays out. And just before I let you go, just 2 pieces of advice, if you don't mind. Please don't cook with don't put so much of garlic in your food. And secondly, when you're cooking, please put the lid on the pot. That way your meat will cook that much quicker.
I love garlic, and if I put the lid on the pot, people won't see what's cooking.
Listen, other people don't like the garlic.
You and I will have a cook-off one of these days.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. I think it'll be very, very interesting with all the comments flying between you and I. But lovely. Love the show. Keep it up. I've been watching it with much delight. So keep it up. And thank you indeed for being with us on the show this morning. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Okay. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
That was named Jeenah, Executive Director at AMEC, talking to us about the 9/11 victims not entitled to Afghan bank assets. And this is now, as he has said, it's a wait and die situation for the Afghan people. It's a wait and see situation for the rest of the world to see how this plays out. And at the cost of how many lives is the key question, is it not? How much of suffering and how many lives lost of innocent people in Afghanistan. 8:35 News and Views with me, Julie Ali, right here on Salam Media.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.